Singh.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Well, the night before the election, we will not forget. The night before the election, Tony Abbott stared down the barrel of the SBS camera and he said there would be no cuts to the ABC and SBS. Well, we know now that that was a complete lie, because the bill before us today would not be before us if it were not for the fact of Tony Abbott breaking his promise. It is a cut, plain and simple. He promised not to cut the funding of our public broadcasters, both ABC and SBS, and he lied. And now he's trying to make SBS viewers pay that price. This bill is really about creating a fourth commercial channel by stealth. In the 2014 budget, it included cuts to SBS of some $53.7 million. And this bill seeks to make up for the $28.5 million of those cuts. So that is at least half, if not more, or at least around half of the cuts that this government has made to SBS. $53.7 million cut from a Prime Minister who, at the election, said there would be no cuts. So that is where we find ourselves now, in this place, having to debate a bill which should never have come to this parliament in the first place. And whether this bill passes or not, there can be no dispute that the government has broken its promise of no cuts to SBS. Now, during the Environment and Communications Legislation Committee inquiry into the provisions of the Communications Legislation Amendment SBS Advertising Flexibility and Other Measures Bill 2015 that we are now debating, the evidence presented raised several critical issues in the provisions of this bill. And in its own submission to the inquiry, SBS itself admitted that the subject of this bill equates to a budget cut at the hands of the Abbott government. Now, I want to show exactly where that is clearly on display. So I will quote from SBS's submission. As a result of the Lewis efficiency study, Minister Turnbull announced further cuts to SBS's funding in November 2014. Of the cuts, $25.2 million were based on back-office efficiencies that SBS was already working towards. A further $28.5 million was predicated on successful legislative amendment to the SBS Act, which will provide SBS with additional advertising and sponsorship flexibility and allow SBS to deliver this portion of the funding cut via a modest annual revenue increase. So SBS's own submission into this particular bill through that Senate inquiry shows very clear how they have articulated what has been hoisted upon them, and that is a cut to their budget, a huge cut to their budget. And so this bill is very much an attempt by the government to make the parliament complicit in breaking of a clear promise by the Prime Minister to the Australian people that there would be no cuts to SBS. Well, those of us on this side of the chamber, the opposition, will not be complicit in the Prime Minister breaking his election promise. We will not be complicit in that. So, if those government senators want to be complicit in that, then I'm sure you will vote for this bill. But you need to remind yourselves, as much as you do your leader, the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, as to what this actually will mean. What it will mean to you, what it will mean to your electorates, what it will mean for you as a government, as you go back to the people if this bill is passed and tell them, oh yes, sorry, we broke yet another election commitment. No, it wasn't ABC this time it was SBS. And in doing so, all you have done is create a fourth commercial channel by stealth. Well, there is significant disagreement between unreleased government SBS modelling that predicts a return to SBS of $28.5 million should this bill pass, and free TV modelling that predicts a return of $148 million over 4 years. But the bottom line with all of this is SBS viewers should not have to watch more ads during their favourite shows to make up for Tony Abbott's lies. Why should the viewers, why should the electorate suffer because the Prime Minister could not keep his word? He could not keep his promise to the Australian people. SBS has an important role to play in our society, in our multicultural Australian society. It provides an outlet for multicultural programming, news and content that showcases Australia's ethnic diversity. So we need to be careful not to turn our SBS into just another commercial broadcaster. SBS needs to be driven by a purpose much more important than profit. Now, I understand that the committee also heard that the bill would mean advertising on SBS during prime time could equal or exceed that allowed on commercial networks. So not only is this creating a fourth commercial channel by stealth, it could actually exceed the amount of advertising that is currently on our current commercial channels, all to make up this shortfall of $53.7 million that has been slapped on SBS by a government, by a Prime Minister who broke his promise after the election. Now, I understand on top of that that Free TV throughout that committee process testified that the passage of the bill represented a threat to commercial broadcasters themselves. So even they are worried about their revenues and their bottom lines. Not only is this a threat to SBS, to its viewers, to the electorate, but it's actually also a threat to existing commercial channels. Well, if the Prime Minister would have kept his word, if he would have kept his promise of no cuts to the ABC, no cuts to SBS, as he said when he looked down the barrel of that SBS camera, we would not be in this position of having to now see SBS being turned into just another commercial channel. It's a cut, plain and simple. Tony Abbott broke his promise to cut the funding of our public broadcasters, that's ABC and SBS. In doing so, he lied, and now he is trying to make SBS viewers pay the price.
Point of order, Senator Canavan.
President, that's the second or third time Senator Singh has imputated that the Prime Minister has lied. I believe that language is unparliamentary. I think Senator Singh should realise that with her experience and my relative inexperience.
Thank you. Order on both sides. Order on both sides. Order. I don't need your assistance, Senator Conroy. I thank you for the point of order. I just advise all senators to be cautious in their remarks about members from the other place. Senator Singh, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, it is plain and simple. However you want to gild the lily, Senator Canavan, it is a lie. It is a broken promise. That is what your leader has done. You've got the opportunity, though. You've got the opportunity to not support it. So why don't you do the right thing and actually not support this broken promise? Maybe then you'll be able to go back to your electorate and hold your heads up high, because at this point in time, all you can do is go back to your electorates and say it has been a broken promise by this government, no cuts to the ABC and SBS. That's exactly all that you have done, is cut our public broadcasters to a very deep degree, to the point that that the SBS is turning into a commercial broadcaster. Well, those of us on this side of the chamber will always stand by our public broadcasters for the greater good of this country, for the telling of Australian stories, including multicultural stories, and that means these cuts should not happen. We will not turn SBS into a commercial channel by stealth.